All right, continuing our philosophy and music conversations, we're just going to wing it. We're just going to go with it.
Yes.
We're going to improvise like we do with the music in the basement. So, I'm going to hand it over.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you try to articulate the particular idea that you're struggling with.
Sure. So, 2016 has been mostly known, at least for music, for the deaths that have happened, whether it be David Bowie, Glenn Frey, Lemmy, those people. And when that all happens in tandem, or it almost seems just one after the other, I suppose it gets me thinking about the death of an artist and how we mourn the loss of a musician and what that means to us as a culture, or what does the process of mourning say about what it means to be a human being or to be a musician? Like what
So
does that all...
So if I can get this straight, there's a thing that you find sort of strange about the fact that all these musical celebrities have died, is that there's an intense sense of loss and grieving and mourning amongst people who never had direct contact with these other individuals.
Right.
And then we could say, well, we had direct contact in a sense that like maybe these people were projected over the airwaves and into our living room, so we felt like we knew them. But in reality, we didn't know them. We knew a part of them. We knew a persona that they presented publicly. And, maybe, hopefully, one day people will grow attached to the personas that we put out there. Because I definitely, when I do my lecture things, I definitely
try.
I'm definitely someone else than I am just conversationally. So, but I think the interesting question is, why do we grow so attached to the myth of celebrity persona? Right? Is that sort of the question? Like people have
that's sort of it, yeah.
Like with Lemmy and David Bowie and all these people, they have these masks that we sort of latch on to, or
yeah, and maybe that too, and also in the sense that we mourn their loss, but they're never really dead, or that their music lives on, and that's another persona too, or another myth. In a sense too. So
why should it make us sad if like they're sort of frozen in time?
Sure, or maybe we're mourning the fact that they can't create more art. Granted, like when they do get older, it's kind of like, well, I don't know what else Lemmy could make from Motorhead besides maybe just like
Ace of Spades salsa edition.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, or I mean, granted that might be a long stretch for at least my tastes or whatever, but I mean, yeah, and there's that idea too, where it's just like art is so interesting in the fact that once you create something, you sort of live on, or at least the artist lives on in another sort of version of themselves that might not exactly be them, but it is them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so let's try to take these questions one at a time, because
Sure.
they're both really, really complicated. So maybe the first one is why we become so emotionally attached to celebrity artists of some,
or just artists in general. Yeah.
Do you think we become more attached to them than we do like sort of the people in our everyday lives? I think we might.
I think we might too.
Yeah, I recently I don't know. I recently, there was someone from the community here in Middleburg that passed away. Mm-hmm. I really liked him. He taught me how to drive a car. He was my bus driver growing up, and he passed away like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And I had the opportunity to go to his funeral, but we hadn't been close since I learned how to drive a car. And I really didn't feel a ton of sadness at his passing. Maybe it's not real to me. Maybe he's still kind of rattling around in my memory or whatever, so it doesn't really seem like he died. But it kind of just felt the natural progression. Why But when, and that doesn't mean I didn't care for him. It doesn't mean that I didn't respect him. It doesn't mean that I didn't value him as a person. But I seem to be more okay with his demise, and I had contact with him. Like, this man taught me how to drive a car.
Well, you bring up a really key point there where you're saying, like, well, he's just kind of in my memory, and maybe, like, I haven't really thought of his loss. I think that's sometimes what we do with people, maybe even celebrities too, in the negative sense, where it's just like they're not like, okay, they're sort of in my memory, like I know this guy exists, but to register his loss is just kind of like, oh well, now he's dead, and that's just kind of put in the memory. But these people that do affect our lives are almost like affect the way we like they're not so much a memory as something that's just so crucial
the
to
more
our
vivid
lives. Yeah.
Well, I would say, like, so the difference between, say, okay, so I had different reactions to Lemmy's passing than I did to David Bowie's.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up with a lot of heavy metal, hard rock. I mean, I did, but I didn't really develop a lot of emotional dependence on it. Now, I have friends who did around here, and they were much more affected by Lemmy's passing than David Bowie's. I was more affected by David Bowie's passing than Lemmy's. And it hit me later, too. I think when we first talked about David Bowie, it didn't strike me as much because I was... But then when I started revisiting a lot of his work, and especially I listened to the song Quicksand, and I was like, damn, like that really brought back a lot of things.
So what were you mourning, or what were you kind of saying damn to? Was it kind of just because he can't make music anymore, or because that person is dead? I mean, I don't know what was registering through your mind when you kind of thought, oh wow, he's dead. That's sort of what I'm interested in. Yeah, is
well, there'll always be more people to make music.
Of course, there's more people to write books, to philosophize, to draw pictures.
It's not. It's like, oh, okay, like there will be someone else to make tones and songs and hooks and things like that. I think.
But there's never going to be another David Bowie.
Right. All right. I think what got me about the experience when I really felt the loss of David Bowie, especially with Quicksand, is that on that song, and then I started thinking about many others, is that he really got to the core of things. And, I never feel like Lemmy spoke a profound truth to me. But this is ignorance. I don't want to offend all the people that are Lemmy fans.
Sure, but let's just talk about David Bowie.
I want to do a little comparison.
Okay.
Is it in the sense that Lemmy never spoke a truth to me. He was a heavy metal archetype.
Right.
Okay. My bus driver and driver's ed instructor taught me how to drive a car, but I'm not sure he spoke an otherworldly truth to me. I think Bowie, through his music, maybe I felt like he opened up like a portal to something else, and maybe I feel the same thing about philosophers.
Sure, or maybe even people you know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah. Totally. I think it has something to do with people opening up. Opening up an aperture to something deeper, more profound, or the other side, or whatever. So, like when you lose, I haven't lost a parent, but I imagine when you lose a parent, a lot of the grieving has to be there because they sort of gave you your so hard paradigm for viewing the world and taught you many, many profound truths, and I think that's why it's got to be such a dramatic loss. Same thing with friendship and lovers and things like that too. Like they open up worlds to us, and I think maybe with philosophers too. I actually cried once when reading the only time I've ever cried reading a philosophy text is when Socrates died in the Five Dialogues, when he sort of bravely or calmly
Yeah.
ingest the hemlock. I read that as like an 18 or 19-year-old, and I wept. Now, there's no other philosophy text I've ever read that has moved me, but I wept because this preternatural figure who was opening up these portals to other worlds was so cruelly taken away from us, and he'd been dead for thousands of years, and
sure,
yet
but it was fresh to you.
But it was brand new to me, and I was outraged right then and there back in 1999, even though it had happened, hundreds of years before the Common Era. So I think it has something to do with the individual being able to open up other things. I don't have the same feeling when like Schneider from Too Close from Comfort passes away. That's a reference from Before Your Time or something like that. I don't have that same sense of sadness.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's that there, I think, is what...
Do you think that's what it is?
I think that's what it is, at least in the sense that the person kind of opens up a different doorway or makes you think of things differently or gives you a warmth or a feeling that you haven't really experienced from somebody else and maybe haven't experienced with yourself. And that sort of definition, though, of why we mourn these people, to me is almost optimistic in the sense that anybody can do that. Anybody can make somebody feel that.
Yeah, you don't have to be David Bowie to have that impact.
And that maybe changes the perspective of what one considers success. I mean, you always hear that. I mean, I always hear that Emerson quote where he lists all these things that make one feel happy, and I think one of them is to earn the respect of people that you admire, and I think another is to make one's, I don't know if he said or Thoreau, I think it was Emerson, but to make one's life, or what, to make one breathe easier. So it's just like, just to make somebody either breathe easier or just be like, somebody else feels the same way I do. Like that sort of thing. And I think if you have that maybe as a goal instead of like, I'm going to try to make money or I'm going to try to get a next Grammy or something, like maybe that changes your perspective on things, and that, I don't know, it's very, to me it's kind of profound, just like, wow, like maybe that's what I should be, like being a good person and trying to help others, whether through my art or just through just the actions of myself, that's...
Right. I mean, I think that... Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of gotten to why there's this sense of grief and why certain people move us so.
Yeah.
That's not to say that we can't... That we can't have mourning and loss in different ways, but it does seem to be a big part of it. Now the other thing is your concern was like the artists are different from, say, the common person, because like they seem to have their sort of personality distilled for all time in certain sorts of media, books, movies. Like people say, I love Marlon Brando, or I love Humphrey Bogart, or and like these, Marlon Brando's dead, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but they still speak about them as if they're right with us, or oh man, I love Simone de Beauvoir, like I love her so much, like she's right there with me because I'm like reading the text.
But all they are just memories. At least even the things that you see on the TV is just a memory of Marlon Brando. It is him, but it isn't him, which is so weird.
And you and I are doing this too,
right? Exactly. Like, when you try to put something in,
like I'm gonna be doing this thing, building this platform until I die, right? And it will be, I will have essentially, I mean, really, and almost every original thought I'm ever gonna have is gonna be
siphoned through this.
It's gonna be uploaded. It's gonna be in a receptacle. And my nieces will be able to interact with Uncle Luke long after he dies. Or if I have children, if I have a wife, I'll always be sort of incarnated virtually so that they can sort of interact with me. But I don't know.
Yeah, you say that your tone is like almost kind of disturbed, which I think is fascinating because we do take it in such a positive, like posterity is great, but then it's just like I'm never going to like just be gone.
Well, because I mean, the sense that I know that I will die,
right?
Like, so
that's our only
right,
truth,
right.
yeah.
So it's a fake sort of immortality, right? Mm-hmm. It's not real immortality. I will perhaps leave traces that allow for a more vivid recollection of me, but like there's no escaping my death. It almost feels like I think the thing that's unnerving about it is that it's more like interacting with a clone of yourself. We were joking on camera beforehand how I have a terrible memory, and part of the motivation for this project is to make it so that I can teach a text once and then move on to other texts, and then I can revisit them and very easily remind myself of them. And so in the preparation for a lot of our podcasts, I have to interact with videos and audio of myself from months ago. And it's almost like I'm high-fiving a future or past version of myself to get prepped for what we do. I think that's the unnerving part, is that I feel like I'm interacting with a different Luke.
Yeah, and I feel like that's been, I think I also addressed to you like the idea, like Montaigne, how he would forget his books, or he would forget what he thought of a book, and then he would make sure to put footnotes in his book and maybe at the end say what he thought. And so then he could flip to the back and realize, oh, I thought about this and this and this about Plutarch or whoever. But I think that's something that's happened since we were able to write, is that we could interact with past selves, whether that be ourself or somebody else's past self. And that's another interesting thing, too. I think it's Italo Calvino. Do you know who Italo Calvino is?
Mm-mm.
He's an Italian writer. He's really, really cool. But he wrote an essay in the essay, it talked about how the identity of an author, how it's like you can have Gustave Flaubert, but then there's the Gustave Flaubert who wrote Madame Bovary, and then there's Madame Bovary, and then there's what Madame Bovary thinks of Madame Bovary. Or there's just this line of that you have Flaubert, and then you also have Flaubert of Madame Bovary, but then you also have the Flaubert of something else, of another book like Salammbô or whatever, and then you have the Flaubert of another book. But some of them combine, but they're different people, or they're different authors per se, even if there is a style there. So it's interesting how we can just have so many different identities, or I guess it's something that's, I think, has been around for quite a long time, ever since we were able to put word on a page. Like, we've been interacting with our past selves. But then again, like, you think of like oral tradition, I wonder if there's the same problem where it almost kind of became public it was more so like a public tale, you know what I mean, like an epic or anything like that, or maybe there wasn't one author, but then once you have it in writing, you can say by blank.
Raises a lot of interesting questions too when you have like pseudonyms and things like that. I specifically think about I think about this with Kierkegaard, because he's representing different aspects of himself through the pseudonymous literature. And I think what's interesting is that, and David Bowie would be an example of this too, as someone who's taking on a bunch of pseudonyms. What we're using these memory distillation devices and media for, some of it may be to sort of like leave this sort of lasting virtual grave marker to ourselves, so that my children's children can sort of interact with what the patriarch was like. But then there are all these other aspects that we use to distill aspects of ourselves, to explore those, and to go and how the different media may allow us to go to some places that we don't necessarily feel comfortable with being sort of the ultimate distillation of ourselves. So, like Kierkegaard with the pseudonyms would never identify with some of the aesthetic writings or the purely ethical writings or even the ethical religious writings or whatever. He identifies primarily with either people who closely approximate Christianity or the Christian authorship in general. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that he'll sign his name to.
Sure.
So what's the? I guess
what's the point of that?
Yeah, the interesting is like why use misdirection and what are we exploring in the?
There's a very interesting journal passage from Kierkegaard where he talks about pseudonyms and he expresses the idea that the individual, at least in society, is. I mean, he talks about freedom, the personal freedom of the individual.
Oh yeah,
sometimes that's trampled, and in this little entry he says, well, with these pseudonyms I'm trying to get at individuality, like so that I could say I believe blank, I say this, even though it's not me, it's somebody, or it is me stating I believe blank, I am an individual, I believe this. So in a sense that he's trying to extract individuality and a sense of personal agency maybe through these pseudonyms, that you feel more like yourself, or you feel more like a self through these.
I think you can validate a lot of aspects of yourself. I think it's
like it's extending on what you said.
Yeah,
prior.
I think if Kierkegaard just came out and said what he wanted to say with his authorship, I think it would have been perhaps taken less seriously, because it would have been, in a way, he would have just been like, he could have easily sort of written off a lot of the views that he didn't agree with. But the fact that he was able to explore them so deeply, he allowed individuals to try them on for themselves and reach the conclusion that these were not fitting ways to live, mm-hmm. and that ultimately they had to ascend to a relationship with Christ in faith, and that this was going to be the only thing that was going to sort of drive out despair. Right. I wonder if people like Bowie or other people that sort of, I guess maybe I think about actors more in general who try on more masks and things mm-hmm. like that, if they have a similar sort of program to what they're doing. If they're trying to find out, either find out something about themselves by exploring it in a very public medium like that, mm-hmm. or if they're trying to lead us to some truth by trying on so many different masks.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I know, at least talking to, I go to Shenandoah and hearing some theater majors talk about this, they express an idea that theater is there to explore humanity. At least I think, when I think of theater, I think of it almost as a more, if we're talking about, we were talking about Nietzsche and stuff, I think of that as the more human art form, because you're using human experience as your medium. Like, that's what theater is about. It's just about humans and what they go through. No matter how surreal it can get, it's usually a human being.
Like, that's interesting. In our conversations about Nietzsche, mm-hmm. we haven't really discussed drama and theater so much. We got so caught up on sculpture and painting and music, but like he's not gonna think about theater all the same, right? Like, so, but it's interesting that we didn't dwell too much on theater in our conversations of Nietzsche.
Yeah, but I think touching on that aspect, that theater can tell us a lot of what it's like to be human. I think that going back to why we mourn these people, it's also because they've been our greatest teachers sometimes of what it means to be human, or what it means to be a sentient being in this world. And that to lose, like you're talking about like losing a parent, that it's almost like that. It's like losing a parent or losing a guardian who has shaped our paradigm. It's exactly like that, I feel like, sometimes, where it's like you have these thinkers or these people, artists, teachers, whoever, that shape the way you live, and then for them to go away, it's like losing some part of yourself or some kind of parental figure, I feel like. It's it's pretty pretty
crazy. I'm so excited to study death now. I really am. I really want to study some death.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, the way I study, I try to go in the newspaper, read the obituaries.
Do you really?
Yeah, I tried to, but there's this guy named Austin Kleon who's a great thinker and writer. I mean, he's more like an artist, but he has this thing where he's just like, read the obituaries, because you'll find that the obituaries are more about life than they are about death, because
they want to play up what the person did.
Right, exactly. And you get to see, okay, what is this guy known for, in the sense of like, oh, you'll see that maybe the things that people play up are more eulogy virtues, as David Brick would call it, where it's more so not resume virtues, like, oh, this guy, he was on time and he had a good resume and he was, like that kind of stuff, like the stuff that gets you jobs.
Didn't have a lot of work experience.
Yeah, but he proved well in the work field. No, but the stuff that really matters is like, oh, he was a kind person. He helped people who didn't have a voice. He was a voice for the voiceless or something like that. Like, those kind of things are what really matter in the end. Again, it's like eulogy virtues, what they say after you die. Like,
I feel like you should really... I think it'd be really wonderful if you expounded on that sort of poetically in some written stuff. Yeah. Why we ought to read...
Well, it's already been done before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I was like, man, that
it's a great idea. That's why I'm just like, wow, that makes perfect sense, because it is about life, where death is about, well, I don't know, like the death of somebody, and maybe that's why we mourn it too. Is like, it's about like their life, or I don't know. Hold on, let me take that back. Where it's just like, it's sometimes when we mourn the loss of somebody, it's more like we're delving into their lives, because like when an artist dies, you delve into their corpus and you kind of see what they, like David Bowie, where it's just like everybody buys his greatest hits, or everybody buys all of his albums and listens to them again, where it's just like, it's kind of morbid to say, like, when somebody dies, you really become invested, or like when an artist dies, that's like sometimes when you become invested in their career, which is kind of odd. But
it took Bowie dying for me to listen to Bowie again.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, hey, maybe sometimes that's some artist's greatest career move, is to die. Like,
some people think that Andy Kaufman never died, or
yeah, or that I never really thought of that way, but like, sometimes death is the best career move, where it's just like, then like your work gets known. Or Tupac too, where it's just like, oh, he died this way. Oh, I have to read his books now. Or I think it was, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was in Vienna. He was like he's now known to be kind of sexist and stuff. But I remember it was Otto W something, but he committed suicide, and he was only like maybe like 27, and his dissertation got really famous. But this whole idea, like you're saying, of death almost kind of creating this aura around somebody, that then it's just like, oh, well, maybe we should focus on their life. I don't know, it's really, that's a kind of a side track.
Yeah, it is interesting how we romanticize people once they die.
Yeah. But,
all right, man. Well, it's getting super late.
That's okay.
I gotta bring it to a close. But I think we covered some ground there. I think we unearthed some stuff.
I think we opened up a lot more questions, which is great.
Yeah, so. You're all about that. I remember going back over the last podcast, and you said that a couple times. That's good. All right, man. See you guys.